Did you know that all states are subject to an annual cap on their borrowings? At present, it is fixed at 3% of the state's gross domestic product. Did you know that in the last 7 years, ended 2023, the states nearly doubled their borrowings to 7.58 lakh crore? Hello and welcome to another edition of Capital Calculus. I am your host, Anil Padmanabhan. Little over a fortnight ago, the Supreme Court of India rejected an appeal by Kerala to prevail upon the union government to relax the state's annual borrowing limits. The state is staring at a financial crisis and hence is in desperate need of resources. It doesn't care whether it accrues as borrowings, which only adds to the state's debt burden. The Supreme Court's denial of Kerala's appeal was based on the mantra of fiscal prudence. Remember, in a federal setup like India, both the center and the states have to subscribe to fiscal probity to maintain economic stability. If not, they risk the country spiraling into an economic crisis. In fact, in 1991, the crisis was triggered by the fiscal abandon of the previous decade. So then, how does the Supreme Court verdict influence the discourse on fiscal probity? Similarly, the issue of cooperative federalism cropped up during this debate. What is its future? To answer this and more, I spoke to Ashima Goyal. She's a renowned economist, a member of the Reserve Bank of India's Monetary Policy Committee, and a professor at the Indira Gandhi Institute for Development Research. I began by asking Ashima on her thoughts on the Supreme Court verdict.
Well, I think the judgment is correct because from a macro stability point of view, there has to be some discipline on state borrowings. And we have examples internationally, such as, in federal structures where subnationals used to borrow and would be bailed out by the center, and that Argentina, used to have 1,000% inflation. We've had periods even in the US and Canada when there was freer subnational borrowing and they got into trouble and then they restricted it. So that's very much a feature of all countries with a federal structure. And there have to be limits on state borrowing.
In fact, we are seeing that in China too, right? At the present moment.
Yes, their current debt crisis. And these are all, as we are embarking on a higher growth path, we have to be very careful to avoid the Chinese kind of situation. And there it was the smaller districts, which were given more powers, financial and other types of decentralization. So, and we've seen in our neighbor also, Sri Lanka has got into so much trouble. And this is especially true in an open economy, because you're subject to assessment of your, and this is stricter for emerging markets, unfortunately. Your sovereign rating affects the cost of borrowing for everybody, and you can have episodes of sudden outflows. And we were in that situation also during 2013, that taper tantrum episode, where we were regarded as BRICS were called the fragile five, double deficits, and so there have to be restraints on deficits, and especially if the borrowing is for consumption, right? Because there can be an argument that if you're borrowing and growth to raise growth rates, it's more sustainable.
In fact, in Kerala's case, is precisely this problem that what you just flagged. It's to make up the shortfall that dues on pensions that have come up, and it's like financing your consumption through borrowings creates a serious moral hazard, right?
Yes, because debt, you have to pay interest on it, and you're not earning if it's for consumption. And how do you pay that interest? So it is not in the state. The state can be caught in a kind of vicious debt trap. It's not in the state's interest to expand borrowing beyond a point, because then your growth can fall, and your investment can fall. We see this among states, that states with a better fiscal picture tend to be able to invest more, spend more on development, social welfare, which improves the lot of their citizens. Very often, these kind of pension requirements are, one small interest group that has outsized power is able to force. And it's also political short-term considerations, like we're seeing with states reverting to the old pension scheme, because these liabilities are going to fall due in the future. So they're kicking the can forward for future governments, while they are gaining sort of populist rewards from people they are favoring now. So it is very dangerous when you take a long view, beyond short-term populist concerns.
Another big takeaway from this judgment is that its emphasis on fiscal prudence. So it's even frowned on off-budget borrowings. And recent finance commissions have also, all of them have stressed the importance of fiscal probity. So do you believe that, from an era of the 80s and 90s, now fiscal prudence is actually now part of the governance lexicon?
Yeah, I think there are two reasons for this. One is, as we moved from a more kind of leftist view of the world and a closed economy view of the world. The leftist view was that you have to fulfill, you have to help citizens. And even at the center state level, it was that the states have a lot of spending responsibility and the center has to help them achieve that. Yeah. And the idea that you are borrowing within your own country, like Japan has very high levels of debt and might be sustainable. But when you're in an open economy, your debt levels, via our government debt levels are very high. We're often compared to East Asian countries, are much higher than those countries. So that affects, our rating abroad and the kind of money we can attract from abroad and the cost of that, and possible crisis when there's sudden outflows, etc. And moreover, I think there's another sort of very negative aspect when you don't focus on fiscal issues or fiscal consolidation, etc. Is that when you have a large number of states, and if one state is sort of, or a few states are not being conservative, then more of the resources go to those states. If you have an automatic revenue deficit filling. Now, in some northeastern states, hill states, it's justifiable because they don't have sources of revenue. So we had done a study, which is published in the national, in a finance journal, in a public finance journal, which showed that when you control for all the factors affecting revenue raising possibilities, own tax revenue, then you find that states are much below their potential. So this automatic filling of revenue deficits, etc., and helping states fulfill their expenditure obligations, meant that states relied on the center and expected central largesse. That the center can borrow as much as it wants, it doesn't matter. They have resources, or they can raise more resources. And they did not develop their own tax resources. And you need to make effort yourself. States, there are a number of, for example, property taxes. Economic theory says that since property can't migrate, they say income tax theory says that income tax should be with the center because it's more elastic. Yeah. If states try to attract people by lowering income tax, then it'll be a race to the bottom, and that revenue resource will really disappear. So that is why you have the Finance Commission too. The center has more elastic taxes. Finance Commission looks after the vertical equality, devolution, etc.
So, in fact, coincidentally, you have just inked a piece on this whole misconception in fiscal federalism. So, one issue you flagged was the right of states to tax and borrow. Borrow has been sorted because that's the kind of fiscal decentralization which has led to the current situation that we are seeing. But your research also shows that restraints on states to borrow are the least severe in India. What are the implications of lifting these ceilings? You just alluded in brief, but can you elaborate?
Yeah, because again, from that old view that it's the duty of the center to help the states fulfill their spending responsibilities, the view was that states are disadvantaged, that center is not doing enough, etc., etc. And so this whole it becomes a kind of political issue. People like to find that they are disadvantaged and use that to pressure. For more. They think that's a way to pressure for more funds, etc. So this whole narrative is incorrect when you look at the data because the outcomes are that our subnational debt levels are among the highest in the world, the fourth largest among all countries in the world currently. The developed or OECD countries' average is 20% of GDP, while ours is close to 28%.
Going back to your article, you also flagged an interesting point. You said the claim of a north-south divide on resource transfers are rather misplaced. While the devolution in terms of taxes based on the Finance Commission recommendations may have come down, the shortfall has been made up by the union government through grants, right? Can you elaborate this?
Right. The view is that the richer states are subsidizing the poorer states. And so the richer, the kind of political issue raised, unfortunately, people like to choose these emotive issues, that which is unfortunate for when you're taking a view from the country as a whole. So again, I thought I would really look at the data on this. And it is true because a premier objective of horizontal devolution across states is equality. The function of the Finance Commission was to ensure equality in public services to the Indian citizen. So whether a citizen is in a so-called poor state, a state with a lower GSDP or higher, he should get the same public services. So there must be some transfer of resources from states that have a higher tax base to those that have a lower, because they're at a lower level of economic development, etc., or have a larger agriculture which is not taxed, etc. And so this was you would expect that the formula by which the Finance Commission devolution is based on a formula which is arrived at after extensive negotiations among states. And this formula, the weight has varied over time, but it's never fallen less than 50, the weight towards per capita GDP. So a state with a lower per capita GDP will get more. So Bihar gets the most, for example, since it has the largest population. And with the finance, this sharing, the equity principle dominates. But then, and there is a large element of grants also in the devolution. That 25% of central grants are based on Finance Commission recommendations. So again, this is an external agency, but 75% is the center decides. And there is the states don't like this because it's discretionary. While the tax devolution is formula based, it's more predictable, etc., etc. And the states that protest the most very often are the southern states. But the irony is that because and then states also don't like conditionality, because that means they have to work, they have to produce some results before they get the money, right? But the irony is that this conditionality has meant that more grants go to the richer states. For example, Ayushman Bharat. The ability to take this up depends on having a good hospital network. And Kerala has a very good hospital network. So 4 southern states, in a study by Indian Express, have the largest number of Ayushman Bharat patients and the largest amount of money goes to them. So when you take account of this conditionality that states protest against, is actually something that allows them to get much more of central resources than they would otherwise. So adding up across other kinds of the formula-based devolution and this conditional devolution, in per capita terms, actually, it's the southern states, the richer states have been getting more.
Given this backdrop, it begs the obvious question: did Kerala act in haste by going to the Supreme Court over his dispute with the centre on a fiscal issue?
Yeah, I don't think it was necessary to go to the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court, while it does not, or it should not adjudicate matters of economic policy, but an interpretation of the law and the Constitution. No, because I think when Article 293 and its amendments, uh, they were at a time when it was largely the center. Initial 293 was when the center was lending to states. There was no market borrowing as such. So therefore, you need to clarify that what happens when states depend more on market borrowing. Because the original wording was that the center can only restrain states if states are indebted to the center or central warranties or something like that. Yeah. But then obviously once market borrowings are allowed or states have large public sector enterprises and therefore off balance sheet borrowing are ways of evading the restraint. And under the FRBM, the Finance Commission has also been laying down pathways for reduction in deficits and amount of overborrowing allowed, etc. So I think that there is a role for the Supreme Court in clarifying and simplifying this due to the changed circumstances, that the market borrowings are increasing, there are different kinds of borrowings.
So, would you say that looking ahead, through a process of trial and error, as we have seen in the last few years, we are creating a new template for cooperative federalism, which is in the context of a more market-oriented economy as opposed to the earlier era? Would that be a fair assessment?
I think that actually today, when after a long number of years of reforms, we are seeing, and a number of external shocks, we are seeing the economy doing relatively well. Yeah, that this is the best time for actually enhancing, fiscal federal cooperative federalism. Like they say, it's easier to agree when the cake is growing than when you're fighting over a fixed amount and your share is at the expense of the other. So, because for India to develop, states have to do a lot. The center can't do it alone, and if the center is committed to this, to the idea of India becoming a developed economy, they have to work with the states. So the main thing is, I think the states have to stop. Some states have to stop using center-state relationships as a kind of political to bring out political issues, or it should be on and this is in the best interests. That the state against that short-term political view that I can win, I can show the other person down, and I can get more support.
So, what you're saying is that right now, the fashion is politics is driving economics. You're arguing it should be the reverse, that economics should drive the politics, right?
Absolutely. There's a book by Albert Hirschman titled Passions versus the Interests. Right? So earlier, when we had few economic interests and interdependencies across states, the passions ruled. So these emotive issues that would have voter buy-in were the ones, because politicians know what will work with voters. And then the interests dominate. That young person, if he has electricity 24 hours and a good bus service, can get a good job and earn much more, will want that electricity and bus service, not an emotive issue that somebody in that state is getting more than I'm getting, etc., etc. Right? So that voter pressure, so the interest versus passions, as the interests become more, the passions should take a backseat. Yeah.
In fact, I would say that in, say, the last 15 years or so, thanks to the basic services, which is what you're referring to, where there's banking in particular is a standout.
Right.
You have banked over 500 million people, which is
yes, and the
mind-blowing
digital technology.
Yes. So I think the space for politicians to go down the traditional path of waving populism as a wand may be shrinking because of what you just said. Once my basics are taken care of, then I'm looking to raise my quality of
Right,
life.
absolutely. And the thing about these sort of handouts is that you're perennially dependent on them. And there's that my bop kind of, you have to beg favors, and every year you need those. Well, if you are independent, you reach a basic level, you have some basic assets, then you know this is you're creating your own capital, your own capacity, and that independence and that confidence that comes is worth much more.
It is then clear that the debate in the Supreme Court and the subsequent verdict has put the spotlight on a very important issue, which is fiscal probity. The timing could not have been better. This is general election season when political parties are prone to making populist promises to lure voters, all of which threaten the fiscal stability both at the state and the union government level. However, the recent round of state elections suggests that the return on populism is not what political parties expect. Yes, some did win on the basis of their promises, but very soon the states that elected them to power have realized the impact of fiscal ruin as it affects the delivery of services, even public utilities. Finally, the face-off in the Supreme Court makes clear that the center and the states have to come together to redraw the contours of cooperative federalism. As Ashima points out, this is not a choice, it's actually an imperative. Because if these two don't come together, India will not realize its objective of becoming a $35 trillion economy by 2047. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to StratNews Global on YouTube. Hit the bell icon so that we don't miss any updates. And please do share your thoughts, ideas, and suggestions with us. I'm available on Twitter or X as it is called today at Capital Calculus. I'll be back next week with another episode. Till then, stay safe.